So when I was talking about the 4 areas of a house, and if you take one of them away, I said it would weaken the overall other 3 because they all intrinsically interlock with each other. And in some cases, when you take one of those 4 components away, you don't have a makerspace. So if you look at the practical element that I talked about, a makerspace, you need a room or something. You can have you could be genned up with all of the theories in the world of how to impact young people in a makerspace. You could have the programs, and you could have the skill set and the capacity of your staff. But if you don't have a space to operate from, then you've hit a dead end. So, and so there's some parts of it that are immovable objects that you require. But the reason for why the theoretical part sometimes gets overlooked is that, yes, technically, you don't actually require, in order to function and run a makerspace, the kind of underpinning theories in the pedagogy or the digital pedagogies that would enhance the overall learning for young people. So again, another previous hat that I wore was I was a master's lecturer at Glasgow Uni on their community development course, the master's course. And one of the things that we talk about, this is one of the things that when you get into youth work in general, or traditional youth work, it's all about, we've got a youth club, we'll get volunteers in, or we have youth work staff, and they engage with young people. What do young people want to do tonight, right? It's a Friday night, we all want to play football, great, and we all play football. And there is a sort of limiting amount of benefit as to what that will do. Yes, it's a really effective way of keeping young people safe on a Friday evening. It acts as a temporary deterrent for a couple of hours on a Friday night before the club shuts at 9 o'clock and they go off and do what they were going to do anyway. And so there's and you maybe play the football, but the theories that you bring within your youth work when you go off to college or university, or you do an NVQ or something like that in youth work, that's when you start to engage and enhance your skill set in terms of the quality engagement that you're having with young people. And then you can start to tease out from that game of football other themes, other issues that you can build on that relationship and give it a bit of breadth and depth. So that's what we're referring to when we talk about some of these theoretical approaches. Again, it's important to why you should have these within a makerspace, because there is a chap called Dave Beck, who some of you might be aware of, very well-known youth work lecturer in Scotland, and he talks about the theory of cultural invasion. So within all organizations and with all youth work organizations, the organization has an agenda. They have a reason for why they're going to do what they're going to do. And if you're aware of the unconscious bias or right bias that some youth organizations have in terms of, we want to impact and support young people in the areas of deprivation, to upskill them or to expose them to experiences between the haves and the have-nots. You've got to be very aware that what you're doing as an organization, that you're not inputting your organizational agenda. And he calls this cultural invasion, because you are not fully consciously engaged with the young people in terms of what their needs are. You're there and understand to a certain level what the needs are, because they're quite evident in terms of the areas or the streets and the communities that you work in. But that tends to only go so far. And then your organizational instincts and your lived experience of being a youth worker kicks in, and then that starts to sometimes tend to take over. And that's why it's important to then start bringing in these pedagogical concepts. So what I'll do is I'll go into each one of them in a bit more detail, and then perhaps we can then start to look at the board. So in terms of the educational theories and pedagogical approaches, you've got what's called constructivism. Now, constructivism is hands-on experiential learning through creation of digital artifacts. And what we mean by that is things like 3D models or computer programs. And constructivism, basically, that is a theory where you're already taking a certain level of lived experience from the young person and you're expanding that more to develop something of more in-depth learning that is going to be direct benefit to the young person through makerspace activities. So one of the typical examples of that would be you have young people who are really into gaming, maybe PC gamers, they might have a PlayStation or an Xbox, and they go online and they play with each other. And basically what's came out of the kind of gaming culture or the gaming activities that young people, and they're just playing it as a game of a form of entertainment, you can use through constructivism a way to develop learning experiences and gamify a certain aspect of an environmental community campaign through gamification. And that is a way through the theory of constructivism of how you would take what initial lived learning that is in young people and develop that into something that is part of what's called issue-based youth work. But if you weren't aware of that particular pedagogical approach, you might not ever do that. You might not ever think about, I'm going to use your current experience in terms of playing FIFA or Rocket League or something like that into something that we can develop as part of an environmental community campaign. Another aspect of that would be design thinking. So user-centered approaches that emphasize problem solving and iterative design through a structured process of identifying problems, generating ideas, prototyping solutions, and testing designs. And that's probably, the design thinking is quite a large core part of the approach to any program. It's going to inform any program that you're going to, or workshop that you're going to deliver at a makerspace. Because what we're doing is that we're asking young people to identify issues or problems or challenges within their communities, within their schools, within their future prospects for employment or the environment, whatever they've identified as what the issue is. And through those makerspace workshops and activities, we get them to generate ideas, not necessarily solutions at this point, but just blue sky thinking ideas as to what you think could be a way of addressing that problem in part or fully. And then you get them through the equipment and the programs that you're developing, you get them to then prototype and develop some form of solution or minimal viable product. And then you would then move them to a test phase. And these are very, very typical, well and tried approaches through lots of, companies, commercial companies today. So you're taking those approaches and embedding them and implementing them from a makerspace point of view. So another one is project-based learning, and this is more long-term. So your design thinking could be a short-term solution, or it could be a long-term, but project-based learning is about more of projects that involve real-world problems and challenges, and they culminate in a final product or presentation. And you provide the tools and the resources and the environment to create the solution. So again, it's kind of, it overlaps with design thinking, but it's much more of a kind of long-term project that could go on for maybe 6 months. And there is some form of taking a real problem issue that's happening in the world, because with the design thinking one, that could be something conceptual and something that's absolute pure fantasy, because it's based off of the idea of going through a process and a step-by-step guide. Then you've got connected learning that emphasizes the relevance of learning to students. And that's a really important part here we're talking about. So when we talk about youth work and we talk about alternative education and a different way from the state delivered education. Connected learning is really emphasizing about how do we provide that learning and that style of learning to students in regards to their own personal interests and experiences, and connecting them to the broader social networks and resources that are round about them, and help them to facilitate opportunities for collaboration and integrating digital tools and platforms. And what we mean by that is that for a whole generation of young people who have grown up through the likes of Google and the internet, and particularly the prevalence of mobile phones, we have generations of young people who are still consumers of digital content and not creators and contributors of digital content. So what we talk about when we emphasize the relevance of learning to students as to why they should engage in a makerspace, why they should engage in any digital product, platform, equipment, program, whatever that might be, it's to make sure that they start to become digital citizens and start to engage in the process of the digitalized society that we live in, so that they are in a position to control that and inform that and shape that for the future, as opposed to be passive consumers and of consumption of that content by others, particular big global tech companies. And then the last one, universal design for learning, which is a framework that emphasizes inclusive and accessible learning experiences for all learners. Again, another kind of aspect of makerspaces that some of these situations will be slightly dictated, but in terms of the design and implementation of your makerspace, before you've even built it, you should start to think about that universal design learning approach, because you want to make your makerspaces absolutely accessible and inclusive for all the learners that you are going to take in, whether they have a additional learning need of some form, a physical barrier of some form, as well as maybe a travel or a financial or some other type of barrier. So you want to think about the audience that you're going to support in this makerspace. There used to be, when I started out building makerspaces, that because of the kind of unique area that they kind of take up within a space within universal youth work, there was this kind of attitude of, if you build it, they will come. And there is a certain truth to that, because the people who are already into coding and programming and gaming or digital content creation and social media will inevitably gravitate to that particular space that you've created for them, because that's their version of a youth club. But there's also a naivety in there. If you think that you build something that you're open to everybody and to all learners, and there wasn't in those early build makerspaces consideration for various other different types of equitable and accessibility in terms of the barriers and the experiences of all learners. So when you're building and designing and creating your makerspaces, in terms of its practical, in terms of the workshops, in terms of the skill sets of your staff, you want to think from the very beginning about the barriers that you're unintentionally creating by focusing on certain aspects of your makerspace development. And so those are the kind of areas that are kind of broken down, those kind of 5 areas that make up your kind of educational theories and pedagogical approaches that you would want from your makerspace going forward to take into consideration.